So welcome everybody. My name is Ashlee Hollinger. I am a counseling therapist with Breelove Counselling, and we are giving you this webinar in partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association of New Brunswick to just offer you guys a chance to ask some questions to a therapist. So we have our first question here, and so I'm just going to kind of dive right in. We only have an hour. So the question is, what resources would you recommend? Coping strategies for anxiety and depression, so websites, webinars, support groups, etc. For instance, is there an online group available while CMHA groups are postponed due to COVID? So I would recommend, there's lots of different things you can find online, honestly. Therapist Aid is a great one. .com. That one's a great one. It has tons of different stuff that you can check out in terms of mindfulness activities, grounding activities, anxiety resources, depression resources. It's a great one. I use it often in my practice. So for those of you who are still new, again, going back to introducing myself, my name is Ashlee. I'm a counseling therapist with Breelove Counselling, and we've partnered with CMHA of New Brunswick to offer you guys this opportunity to ask questions to a therapist. So if you have any more questions, you can email me directly, and I'll provide my email at the end. So I'm just going to kind of keep going, and if you have any questions, just kind of send them along through either the Q&A or the chat section, or if you feel comfortable, you can raise your hand. So going back to coping strategies for anxiety, depression. So like I said, Therapist Aid, which I've posted in the chat, is a really good one. We also offer, right now, CMHA is offering different groups online. Tomorrow they're offering a self-compassion webinar. We also have a mindfulness webinar coming, or mindfulness group online coming up. So those are kind of options for us in the virtual world to help us transition into the online platform rather than when we don't have the option to go in person. So if you contact CMHA, they can kind of let you know how to get registered for those different options if you're interested. Other ones that I'm thinking of, nothing comes to mind at the moment, but if I remember any, or if any come up, I will definitely post those in the chat section. Like I said, there's tons of different resources out there right now. I'm sure on social media you've probably seen a ton of stuff. I know I've come across a bunch of different options right now in terms of different courses that are being offered for free. Yale's offering a free course on happiness right now. So there's lots of different things that are offering. So it's interesting because as scary as this time is and as anxiety producing as it is, there's also a lot of different options and we're lucky to have the online platform that we do and the online resources that we have, because yeah, a lot of people are kind of stepping up and offering a lot of cool things online. So another question comes through in terms of the different tools and resources for stress management. So during this time as we're kind of navigating this whole COVID-19 and coronavirus and social distancing and also kind of social isolation, something that I would highly recommend to everybody is just to find a practice that helps you kind of ground yourself and reduce your stress and kind of practice mindfulness. Right now, we're in a position where this whole situation has really destabilized everyone. Regardless of your situation, this has created a sense of discomfort, a sense of uncertainty, and it's really kind of shifted our sense of safety and security, whether that be through finances, whether it be just kind of general anxiety that we're having. Like, it's really created a big effect on us. So when we do feel unsafe, safety is a huge part of how we cope and how we manage our emotions. So if we don't feel safe, if we don't feel comfortable, then we're going to have a harder time managing feelings and kind of coping to the best of our ability. So when we do feel a sense of feeling unsafe, it's really important to kind of ground ourselves, to use mindfulness, to check in with how we're feeling, and just making sure that we're staying as as calm as we can, if that's possible. I'm actually I was reading a book by Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress. And he writes quite beautifully that research literature has identified 3 factors that universally lead to stress, which is uncertainty, the lack of information, and the loss of control. So if we think about what's happening right now, this is a huge source of stress for everybody, because this virus is, 1, leading to uncertainty. 2, we feel as though we have a lack of information, even though we're being inundated with information from the news, but there's also a lack of information in terms of we're only getting almost biased information sometimes, whether from the news, or they're maybe not telling us everything because it's changing all the time. And we're learning new things every day from this virus and what's going on. So again, we don't know all the information as a person kind of just watching it through the TV and through the news. And then the last factor would be a loss of control. So we all feel a sense of loss of control right now, because we don't know what's going to happen. We have no control over what's happening financially or economically. We have no control over this whole process of social distancing and whether other people are social distancing, whether you're taking it seriously, but other people may not seem like they are. So again, there's lots of different things that are happening right now that are contributing to a sense of stress. And interestingly, because of what's happening and because of the way our society has kind of moved forward and evolved, oftentimes we can't connect our stress and the way that our bodies are feeling sometimes. So there's a disconnect between those 2 things. So you may not be feeling typically stressed. You may actually be finding yourself enjoying this time that you have to kind of relax, and maybe you're staying home a little bit more, and you're not dealing with work and as much. And so maybe you're feeling a lack of stress, which is great, but inherently this situation is a stressful one. So just make sure you're checking in with yourself on that. And even if you don't necessarily feel typically stressed out, just be aware that regardless of what you're feeling, this whole situation is quite stressful. So it's important to make sure that you're managing that as best as you can. Meditation is a great one. So for me personally, I use an app called Insight Timer. It's free and it has tons and tons of different meditations on there. You kind of have to pick through and figure out what ones you connect with the best. But there's lots of different ones there. And yeah, any kind of app that you use to meditate, or even deep breathing apps can be helpful. And again, that therapist aid website, or even different tools you can find online for exercises like mindfulness exercises, deep breathing exercises. So another question comes in on what are the supports and or resources that are available for hospital workers or others working during this time. So again, we are offering tons of different webinars and workshops that are like on self-compassion, which would be a great one to take. We're also offering one on mindfulness. So again, these are options that we can use for those people, and offer those to those who are working frontline and who are doing great work right now, and those who are still needing to work during this time and considered an essential worker. We also have a counseling clinic that we are going to be running from Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 10 to 4. It's a 45-minute session. So you can take advantage of that too if you're just finding, you just need to talk, get some resources, and just get a little extra support right now. So for any people who are, still working with the public, working in a grocery store, and working frontline as a nurse, wherever you may be working, that, like we said earlier, is considered an essential service. There's likely a lot of anxiety and fear about working during this time. Again, you're interacting with the public, and because of the nature of this virus and because of the way that we're kind of dealing with it in terms of social distancing, there's a lot of, fear associated with this, like being out in public right now, right? When we leave our homes, there's inherently a sense of not being safe because who knows what's going to happen, right? Where there's fear. So again, all you can do is just, again, recognize the fear, acknowledge the fact that you have to work, and unfortunately you're going to be exposed, you're going to be out in the public, and more likely maybe to be exposed, and just also understand that you can only do the best that you can. And you just take as many precautions as you can. So make sure you're washing your hands, be mindful about not touching your face, all the different things that they've told us to be mindful of. And just do the best that you can, and just know that this is stressful. You're going to have days where, the fear is a little bit higher than others. Your anxiety might be a little bit higher than others, but you're doing the absolute best that you can. And we really appreciate the fact that you're still working so that we still have access to services that we need in our community. So a question comes in about co-parenting during situations like this. That's a great one. It's definitely going to be challenging to co-parent during this time, especially depending on how worried you are about the virus, and what your kind of personal feelings are on that in terms of having your child travel back and forth. It could be a case of, maybe for the time being, the child stays with one parent, more like for the time being, so that they're not having to travel back and forth. And again, I think it comes down to, regardless of whether this is happening or not, co-parenting is tough. And it requires a lot of open and honest communication with your partner and kind of getting on the same page. So regardless of if there's a pandemic happening, I think the best thing that you can do for both yourself and for your child is to communicate with that parent, and just figure out what you both feel comfortable with doing. And if, again, understand that right now emotions are probably going to be really heightened. I would imagine that any parent right now with a child is probably pretty worried about their own children, and kind of wanting to protect them and keep them safe. So if you're noticing that you're having higher anxiety and you're really struggling with that, especially in relation to your child traveling back and forth, and being concerned about the child not being at home with you, again, just as much open communication as you can muster, and just make sure that you guys are on the same page about it, and that both parents are taking as much precaution as they can if the child is traveling back and forth, to just be as safe as possible. And again, just the same rules apply in terms of like making sure you're washing hands, sanitizing things, and kind of doing it that way. And again, communicate with your partner about, or sorry, not your partner, but with your co-parent, on how you guys want to handle the situation, and would it be best if the child wasn't traveling right now, back and forth, or if you still feel comfortable doing that. It's going to depend on the type of relationship that you have. It's going to depend on the child. Like, there's a lot of different factors. There's no one way to right or wrong way to do it. All right, another question comes in talking about managing symptoms through lots of different coping strategies. So having a routine, good sleep, physical activity, doing calming activities like coloring and baking, great activities, great suggestions. However, during this time, it's overall been a lot higher than right now, obviously. It's really exhausting, resulting in a lot of dissociation. And for anyone who doesn't know what dissociation is, when someone has experienced a lot of trauma or adversity in their life, oftentimes our mind is has a really wonderful tool, in the sense that when we experience overwhelming things, it takes us away from that, right? So we're able to, our mind protects us from these really, really crazy things that are happening, and allows us the space to disconnect from it. So again, it's a coping mechanism, and it's a strategy to protect us and keep us safe. But when you're out of that sense of danger as an adult, maybe if you had childhood trauma, as an adult, when you don't, when you're not in the face of danger anymore, and you're out of that situation, and you're not unsafe anymore, and this is still happening, you're still experiencing dissociation, which again, it almost feels for a lot of people like you're you're kind of hovering outside of your body, like you're not connected to yourself anymore. And it can kind of create lapses in memory or just like time, and people, it's like really, really zoned out. You're really not present. So this can interfere with daily life if you're not unsafe and if you're an adult now and you're okay. So the question, I mean, I guess comes to the point of, how do you deal with dissociation, and I guess in extreme cases of anxiety, extreme cases of distress during times like this. The person says, I know mindfulness has this very strong evidence base, but if we're honest, I hate it. That's interesting. I would be curious, I guess, to know why you hate it, and yeah, where it comes from. Do you hate it because you find it difficult and challenging, or do you just genuinely not connect with the idea and it just doesn't work for you, right? Oftentimes, coping strategies don't necessarily feel good, right? We're trying to retrain ourselves to think in a different way or to act in different ways, and sometimes they don't feel the best, and they feel uncomfortable in the beginning, and especially with mindfulness techniques, they require a lot of practice. So it's not something that you're just going to kind of pick up and it's going to work right away. You have to really work on it and go through it. Mindfulness, especially things like deep breathing and meditation, require attention and kind of attention training and refocusing. And that can be difficult for people who tend to live in their heads and they're not necessarily super mindful, right? So if we kind of tend to have a lot of racing thoughts and we're not always staying in the present moment, mindfulness is challenging that and asking you to do those things. So it makes it extra hard. Right. So the person responded in terms of my question, and I said that it requires more attention and energy than I tend to have available, which again, right, that it makes sense because mindfulness is a skill. It's not just an activity that we practice to help us. It's a skill. So it is going to challenge you, and it's going to force you to learn to try a new thing and to work on certain skills that maybe we haven't had before, haven't had to use before. So again, if you practice enough and if you find a certain mindfulness activity that you connect with more, I think that might be helpful. Another one that's simple, which it is technically mindfulness, but it's not necessarily any sort of particular activity, but anything you can do to ground yourself. And by grounding, I mean reconnecting with your senses to bring you into the present is going to be helpful. So whether you have a grounding stone, so you find, say you really like nature, you go outside, you find a rock or on the beach or on a nature walk, and you just carry that stone with you. And when you start to feel yourself getting really emotionally charged and overwhelmed, you pull out that rock and you hold it in your hand. So a grounding item can be great. Some people use certain smells to do that. Some people also would use smells, sounds, touch. So just any way that you can engage your senses to take you out of whatever's happening in your head at that moment that's making you feel overwhelmed, to bring you into the present. So using your senses, it's a great way to do that. We often talk about, as therapists, the exercise of 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, and 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. And again, it's simple. It can be hard sometimes to find exactly 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 things for all the different topics, but it's a great one, again, to just engage your senses and bring yourself back and kind of refocus your attention away from that big thing that you were thinking of or whatever happened in that moment to trigger you, and bring you back into the present. Another easy one is literally just taking 3 big deep breaths, right? So focus on the air going in and the air coming out. And when the air goes out, just really focus on relaxing your body, right? Even bringing your shoulders up when you breathe in and kind of really relaxing them down when you breathe out. So there's really simple techniques that you can use as mindfulness activities to calm your nervous system and bring you out of a really distressing state that could lead to dissociation. So another question comes in on the importance of maintaining relationships and communication while not being able to meet up with people in person, and how isolation affects our mental health. So great question. I can't stress enough how important it is for human beings to connect and have relationships and communicate with people. That is a basic human need that we have. If we talk about the hierarchy of needs that Abraham Maslow presented a long time ago, he in general talked about the need for, we need safety, basic safety needs, esteem, and then there's esteem needs. So belongingness is one of the big ones, right? So we need to feel like we belong in order to feel good about ourselves and as a human. So even though right now we can't physically connect with others and we are limited in how we're being able to connect, and I think interestingly enough, before this time, connecting through texting and FaceTime or online or anything was often kind of seen like in a negative light in certain ways because we were so technology focused, and that was, again, had this negative association. But right now, I tend to lean onto the fact of like, it's amazing that we have access to technology that we can connect with people without needing to see them face to face or without physically being in their presence. So if there was ever a time to have this happen where we needed to do these things, now is a great time because we have access to so many different platforms that allow us to connect even if we can't do it in person. Like, imagine back in the day when they didn't have technology and all they had is letter writing, right? You would be pretty lonely and pretty isolated, especially if you lived alone back then, because we didn't have access to things that could allow us to connect. So even if it may not feel as good to connect on FaceTime or on whatever platform you're going to use, it does feel good, and it's important to do so, even if it's just calling somebody up for 5 minutes and just checking in, setting up a certain time with somebody every week to kind of have a FaceTime date or a video date. Just little things like that can be really helpful to your mental health. Isolation has a lot of negative effects, right? I guess it depends on what we're talking about. Being physically alone and physically isolated isn't always necessarily meaning that you're lonely, if that makes sense. So you can be alone but not lonely. It's when isolation tips into that loneliness area where you're not connecting with others and you don't have that that socialization that we need as human beings. That's when it tips into more of a dangerous area. Excuse me. So isolation and being lonely really does have a lot of negative effects. It can lead to depression, and other mental health disorders. It can also lead to even physical disorders and physical disease. So it really is important to take advantage of the fact that we have technology at our fingertips if we're lucky enough to know how to use it and have access to it, and just even a phone call, and just take the time to check in. It really does help to have those moments with people in our lives, and kind of, it breaks up some of the isolation that we're having, especially if we live alone. So I can't stress enough how important it is to maintain relationships during this time. So another question comes in, when this pandemic is finally over, what advice can you give to people in feeling comfortable in social situations? Great question. This is something I've been thinking of myself a lot. It is going to be quite interesting when this is all over, to go back to normal life, because things have changed so drastically. And again, like we talked about earlier, there's a fear associated with going out now and being around people, and there's lots of anxiety associated with that. So when this is all done, I don't think that anxiety and that worry and those fears are going to go away right away. I think there's definitely going to be people who jump right back in and are excited and just can't wait to be back out. But I think it's, for a lot of people, that anxiety and those fears are still going to be there. And it's still going to be a relevant part of your life, rightfully so. This is scary. We've never experienced this before. This changed a lot of things for everybody. One thing I can say is that, again, the same techniques that we're kind of talking about in using to manage our stress and cope with our anxiety right now in the present. Same thing applies for when things go back to quote unquote normal. All you can do is kind of help yourself as much as you can in terms of staying up with like self-care and taking care of you and taking care of your mental health, as well as making choices that are going to allow you to feel as comfortable as possible. So if that means when the pandemic is finally over and you are able to go do things, but you maybe still feel uncomfortable to do that, maybe ease yourself back into it. Don't dive right back into everything and just do whatever you used to if that makes you feel uncomfortable. So just easing yourself back into it, and not pushing yourself overly. And even if people are kind of pressuring you into it, if you feel really uncomfortable, honor that and give yourself the space to slow yourself into being back into normal life. So another question, can you talk about how to practice self-care without overindulging to the point of feeling guilty? So that's a great one. Again, right now, I think all the rules that we used to have are kind of out the window. Practicing self-care is something that's really important in daily life, whether there's a pandemic happening or not. I think it depends on what your definition of self-care is, right? For a lot of people, self-care can be eating a certain type of food, like baking something and having a cookie, or maybe it's watching Netflix, maybe it's taking a bath, doing yoga, whatever your self-care is. And not to say that there's any right or wrong way to do self-care or any right or wrong methods. But I think if you're feeling guilty that you're doing so much self-care, it's like, well, why do you feel guilty about it? What is it that your form of self-care is causing you to avoid doing, or is your form of self-care actually you procrastinating or not being as productive as you would like to be? And again, it's hard to talk about that right now because there's no pressure to be productive right now. If you're at home and you're feeling a lot of stress and you need to take care of yourself in whatever way that looks like to you, that's okay. You're allowed to do that. There's no pressure to be productive or to do really anything during this time other than just kind of take care of yourself and be as safe as possible. But if you are feeling a sense of guilt, I would be curious about why you're feeling guilty and what is it that maybe you're ignoring or avoiding by indulging or overindulging in this self-care. I think that if you're engaging in self-care mindfully and intentionally with the purpose of easing anxiety or helping you through stress, I don't think there's ever going to be a sense of guilt attached to that. So if you are feeling guilty or if you're feeling you are overindulging, it's like, well, again, why are you feeling that way? What is it that you're avoiding? And I think some forms of self-care can be, there's a fine line between self-care and avoidance, or self-care and kind of like procrastination, or kind of allowing you to numb out or to not think too much or too heavily into things. So again, kind of checking in on the ways that you are engaging in self-care and what does that look like, and is it actually you avoiding something or just kind of numbing out and not feeling or not doing, and maybe that's why you're feeling a little guilt over it. Otherwise, maybe it's because you've never had the opportunity to not be busy before. So taking this time or having the time for the first time ever to just allow yourself to do what you want and not have other pressing things that you need to be doing, it feels really foreign to you, which is why you feel guilty. So there's lots of different reasons why we can feel guilty about this, right? For a lot of people, I think being busy is the norm. Kind of always that go mentality is so common nowadays. And so when we don't have that go, when we can't do go, it's like, well, crap, what do I do? So for those of us who feel bad when we're not busy, or who feel that we're not doing enough when we're not busy, that can lead to feeling guilty of taking care and just kind of relaxing and doing something that may not be overly productive. And again, checking in with yourself on, why do I feel like I always have to go? Why can't I just enjoy myself and allow myself this time to relax? I deserve it. right? So I hope that answers that question a little bit. So this question comes in talking about how, because we've transitioned into the online platforms and we're video conferencing both and working from home through video conferencing for a lot of us, and how parents and friends are wanting to connect more, but this person's finding that they're peopled out. So the last thing that they want to do is to connect on FaceTime. And so there's also an element of healthy boundary setting with everyone being really heightened and their anxiety being really high. Great question. I completely understand that at the end, it's like any other work day, right? When we if we've had a long day, we come home and we don't necessarily feel like being overly social or connecting with a lot of people. Some of us need downtime to relax and just not do anything and not be required to be on anymore. And especially with video, I think maybe sometimes we might overcompensate a little bit with being on, because we're operating on a little less body language and stuff. So we have to be a little bit more present and on when we're on video to kind of convey what we're talking about and what we're kind of trying to get across. So it can be hard to be online all day and to stare at a screen all day and to be kind of chatting with people and then have to come home and have people be wanting to connect with us, even though it's a different type of connection because it's family and it's friends, it's loved ones. It is really tricky. And I think, again, it's about setting, like you said, setting healthy boundaries in terms of knowing what your limit is. And if you, at the end of the day, you can't connect via FaceTime, just put it aside, right? Don't ignore it, and don't ever carve out time for it. But setting that time aside to do that on your own time when you have the space to mentally do that for yourself. We, again, through technology, we're kind of lucky in the sense that we're not necessarily expected to answer right away. We are expected to answer right away. People have that expectation, but we don't have to answer right away. So you can ignore a FaceTime call, you can ignore a text, you can ignore a phone call. And maybe it's just about saying, and just being open and just saying, maybe today is not a right time. Can we reschedule for later this week? So just being open and being very direct, being honest and being assertive on what you need, and just saying, I've had a long day. I was on video conferences for the whole day. And, I just don't really feel like, I need a night to myself. And you don't feel guilty about the fact that you're taking time for you and you're setting that limit, because it's actually a healthy thing that you're doing. And also, again, being mindful of the fact that, right, everyone's anxiety is heightened right now. Everyone's feeling a little bit more sensitive, on edge, and because of everything that's going on. So people might not react in the same ways that they typically do when during this time. So they're going to be more heightened, and maybe they won't take you saying, I need a little extra time to myself lately. They might not take that very well. And, again, that's on them. That's theirs. That's not yours. You can do the best that you can to just set those limits and be kind about that. And do your best to be direct. If they are going to take that personally, that's their stuff. Again, as long as you kind of are almost like a broken record in some ways, and just say, it's not because I really want to talk to you. It's been a while, but I need the night to myself. Let's reschedule. And again, set the time frame so that you can kind of control the narrative in that way. So another question in terms of, most people talk about all the time that they have. In my case, I continue to work every day from home. I have no time at all. It's very uncomfortable. A dear friend passed away last week and I cannot see family, and I'm sick at the point of not knowing what to do. I can't lose my job and I don't know how to deal with this. Well, first of all, I'm really sorry that you lost a friend during this time. That cannot be easy. I can't imagine going through something like that in this time. And I think, unfortunately, that is a reality that a lot of people are going to face, is that we're losing people and yet we're being asked to keep away and to not connect physically. And when someone passes away, one of the things we need the most is connection. I can hear you when you say that working from home can definitely seem more challenging, and it almost, it seems like we're working from home almost makes work even longer, or it extends into home life much more easily. And we can seemingly have no time when we have all the time, if that makes sense. I think something that's important, and maybe this isn't your struggle, but when we are working from home, it's really important to carve out boundaries in terms of work time and home time, because even though we are home, we don't want to let work bleed into kind of regular time. Just as if you were going into the office, you would go in at a certain time, you'd leave at a certain time. So maybe setting really strong boundaries on that and limits on that, and saying, you know, I'm working from 9 to 5 or whatever your shift is. And then after that, I'm unplugging, I'm taking time away, I'm going to be with myself, I'm going to be home. So there's a lot of different things that are happening in that case, right? You're overwhelmed with work, you're dealing with grief about losing somebody, and there's a lot of change and transition happening. And there's also a lot of fear about, kind of maintaining financial stability and maintaining your job and your career, while also going through all this emotional turmoil and chaos. So there's a lot happening. Again, like I said earlier, if you need extra support during this time, and it makes total sense, especially if you have a lot going on. So definitely reach out if you need to access our clinic that we're offering, or any other of the webinars and series that we have going on to kind of help you through this time, because it's important that you maintain your mental health as much as possible, especially with a lot of stuff going on. Okay, another question comes in. So how to comfort a partner who is unable to make money right now due to the nature of their job? That's a really hard one, because again, like I said earlier, this is kind of destabilized everyone, and it's really created a sense of we've lost our sense of safety, and that includes financial safety. So if this person is unable to make money right now or to do their job because of everything that's going on, that's really uncomfortable. It's very scary. It's very fear inducing, to not be able to make money, and to kind of be left in the dark here. And we're not sure how long this is going to be and how long this is going to go on. You likely have bills and payments and things. Like, it's a stressful time. I guess maybe one thing you can do is just be there as a support system, to listen with the intent to hear, not with the intent to find a solution or to fix the problem, right? I think that can be a really big barrier in listening, is that when we listen with the intent to fix or solve, which comes from a place of love, absolutely, but we're not actually really hearing what the person is saying. And oftentimes when somebody's reaching out and just kind of complaining, or they just need to vent, or they're just speaking out about how they're feeling, they don't need a solution. They just need to feel heard, and they need to feel that they're seen, and just that that they have someone that they can go to feel that way. So right now, all you can do, you don't have the solutions. You don't know what's going to happen. You can't fix this for them. No one can really, because we don't know what's going to happen. Everything's really up in the air, which is, again, scary and very fear producing. But all you can do is be there to listen and be a support as best as you can, and just try and listen and comfort and support, and just know that it's temporary. We don't know the end date, but it is temporary, and we're all in this together. Everyone's going through the same aches and pains right now in terms of financial stuff and jobs, and just struggling through social isolation and being on our own. So it's everyone's going through it. And that there is thankfully a lot of government support happening right now, and maybe looking into those kind of options would be helpful when those become available. But yeah, it's just about listening and being supportive, and not kind of trying to solve the problem, because right now there really isn't a solution at this point, other than kind of what the options are that the government's giving out, and just kind of knowing that, again, it's temporary, but it's real nonetheless, and it's valid. The fear is very valid. So this question comes in terms of people that have other illnesses or need surgeries, that have now been put on hold due to the virus, and how that's affecting them. It is absolutely very scary. If you are somebody who is experiencing chronic illness, or who may be higher on the risk scale of contracting COVID, or yeah, needs a surgery or has an illness that requires going to the hospital all the time, whatever the case may be, if you're not completely 100% well, this can be a really difficult time, because again, it's extra scary for you because you're already concerned with your health daily, and then this whole thing has kind of created an extra worry or an extra pressure on you to be scared or to feel uncertain. I think something, again, something that we all have to realize is, again, this is really out of our control, which again leads to stress, leads to fear, but all we can do is control ourselves. All you can do is kind of recognize what you have control over, what you don't have control over, and how do I focus on what I do have control over. So all you have control over is yourself, and staying as well as you can, having access to the things that you need as best as you can. And I hope that there's kind of resources in place for those who do have chronic illnesses and who do need stuff like that, in terms of getting help and healthcare that they need at this time. That's something, unfortunately, I don't know a ton about. I don't work in that sector in terms of, I'm not a doctor or nurse, but yeah, I'm wishing all those people well, because again, the anxiety and the fear is definitely really heightened for those who are struggling or who are at a higher risk for contracting the virus when there's so much fear around getting it in the first place. So this question comes in, so this person's having difficulty enjoying things that they normally would, so reading, video games, and any suggestions for how to remedy that. I'd be curious in terms of why you are feeling a sense of like a lack of enjoyment there. Yeah, a sense of disruption in the pleasure that you're feeling from the things that you normally find exciting. Is it because you're feeling extra anxious? Is it because you're feeling more distracted than usual? Are you just having a hard time kind of focusing on these things? There's lots of different ways that can kind of distract us from the things that we normally find pleasure in, but I would imagine that it would be important to check in on what's the feeling underneath that. Why, like, is it because you're distracted and because you can't focus in on the game or the book, so it's hard to enjoy it and get into it? Or is your anxiety heightened? Like there's something underneath that, and I would be curious as to what that is, and then kind of go from there. So if it is a matter of distraction and just kind of feeling a little bit more mindful rather than mindful, if your mind is really full all the time and kind of racing thoughts, and you're not able to keep track of all those things, and you're just kind of constantly worrying and thinking, and your mind's kind of in that wheel, of course it's going to be hard to get into your video game or your reading. So mindfulness is really important. Noticing when you're kind of zoning out and not in your body, and you're just kind of in your head and you're in that wheel and you're constantly thinking. So if you can notice when that's happening, then you can decide, hey, you know what, I'm going to bring myself back into the moment and leave those thoughts aside and not kind of give into that wheel a little bit more. Subsequently, reading a lot of news, or watching a lot of news can be really anxiety producing. I know personally for myself, I avoid the news at all costs, which again, sometimes I feel guilty for, and because I'm not always up to date on the most recent things. But at the same time, I know that for me, my anxiety kind of gets heightened by listening to all of that stuff, because, it's just constant. It's a constant loop of information. So one thing that we do suggest is to limit the news that we're taking in, especially at a time like this when there's a global pandemic, because if you're hearing it constantly, then you never have a break from it. You're constantly thinking about it, and you're constantly being told different things, and it's endless. So limiting the amount of time you watch the news would be important. Just because you only watch an hour a day doesn't mean you're really missing anything, right? Like, let's be honest, the news is very repetitive. So if you watch at the end of the day, then you're probably going to get the recap of the entire day. So yeah, limiting your news, maybe taking it in a different form. So if instead of watching it, maybe finding news articles and reading them could be helpful. Making sure you're picking a trusted source. So instead of kind of going through all the different types of news sources and reading all of them, choose one that you trust and that you believe in, and focus on that one. Because again, like I said, you're going to get the same news from multiple different sources. And so again, it's constant, it's endless, and it's hard to, you know, to know when to stop, how to stop, and what's true, what's not true. Like, it can lead to a lot of anxiety. So definitely be mindful of keeping up with that in the way that serves you the most. And again, checking in with yourself when you're watching the news, like, am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling upset? Am I feeling distracted? How is this making me feel right now? And if you're noticing that you're heightened, that you're starting to feel kind of like upset or anxious or whatever the case may be for you, if you can notice that, then it's like, okay, well, now I can decide that I don't want to take part in that. I don't want to do this anymore. And you can turn the news off or do something else, right? So again, it's all about mindfulness and being intentional about what we're doing. So when you can check in with yourself and notice how you're feeling about the news. And I think the fact that you even asked the question shows that you do find an awareness and you're noticing that it does make you upset. But again, it goes back to that sense of, we need to know and kind of keep up and know what's going on. I would guarantee that if you didn't watch the news for a full day, you would still know exactly what's going on, because one, everyone's talking about it. Two, people that you interact with, the friends or whatever, are probably going to talk about it with you and give you the updates if they watch the news. Facebook, social media, Instagram, like, there's lots of updates on there. So again, you're going to hear the news and the updates anyway. And you can also kind of directly search for certain things if you do have questions or kind of want answers to certain things. So again, just keeping mindful and keeping intentional about that is really important. Yeah. So a lot of people agreeing with the idea that, you know, the news is really tough and it makes us all kind of feel anxious or sad, or worried for the community. Again, this is a reality that we're facing, unfortunately. And again, we don't have control over what's going on. All we can control is ourselves and what we're doing to manage during this time, and what we're doing to keep ourselves safe in terms of practicing social distancing and washing our hands correctly and just limiting our exposure. So all you can do is focus on what you have control over, which is yourself. So it's tricky when you're kind of, say, even on your own street or your own block, like, you're seeing a lot of people who are not practicing social distancing. It can create anger, right? But that anger is a secondary emotion. Underneath that is really actually fear, right? So when we see people who aren't social distancing, it's frustrating to us because it creates fear of, like, well, if you're not social distancing, if people aren't listening, if people aren't actually following the rules, then that means that everyone else is at risk, and we're going to be social distancing for longer, right? So I think underneath that anger and that frustration is actually really just fear about what's going on. And again, that lack of control, and that lack of, it almost kind of seems like a lack of respect too, because you're kind of holding up and you're following and doing the best that you can. And to see other people not doing that, it's really tough. So we had one, I think everyone can see this, but a great tip in terms of taping the news and watching it at a later time, so you don't necessarily have to watch it right then, and not watching it at bedtime. I think that's something that is a really good tip. Right now, again, when we have heightened emotions, when we have heightened anxiety, it can be really difficult to calm ourselves down and especially at nighttime, to fall asleep. So again, having a really good nighttime routine for yourself to settle yourself down. Maybe it means shutting your phone off for an hour or two before bed. Maybe it means meditating before bed, listening to relaxing music, as someone suggested. And just being really mindful, tuning into yourself and kind of shutting off all the noise. So again, as much as the news is informative and it's important to keep track of what's going on and be informed, it also can be noise and kind of a distraction, or it can create anxiety. So just setting boundaries for yourself on that, and knowing when to shut it off and when to have it on. And if you're somebody who knows that, you know, I struggle to fall asleep, especially if I've watched the news, or if you have been watching the news at night and then you're noticing a pattern of struggling to fall asleep, then it's like, okay, well, maybe I can try something different here. again, it's not gonna, all of these strategies and these tips, it's not gonna be kind of you figure it all out and tomorrow and you kind of, you land on the perfect solution and then that's it. Like, it's going to take some time and trying different things and trying different combinations in order for us to find a method that works best for us. But luckily we have the time and the space to do that and to do the best that we can for ourselves. So just tuning into you and what works best for you is really important. So advice for people who are in the odd situation of having heavier workloads at this time, or a more stressful position due to the nature of their job. Especially I'm imagining people who are in kind of frontline work, nurses, doctors, even grocery store workers. Like, there's a lot of pressure on certain people, and I'm not naming all of them, but that doesn't mean I don't think they're important. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. But I think for those of us who right now do have a heavier workload and are in a more stressful position, again, we can all attest to the fact that this is a stressful time regardless of if we're working or not. But especially if we are having a heavier workload, again, it's even more important than ever to make sure you're taking care of you, making sure you're setting really healthy boundaries on work versus home, and just being very mindful about how you're feeling and not if you can control that, if you have a certain amount of control over how much you're working or how little you're working, to, be mindful of that and take advantage of those things and set boundaries, and practice as much self-care as you can in terms of getting enough sleep, eating well, hydrating, getting as much exercise as you can. Like, these are all they're simple things, but they're also really difficult to do when we're feeling really stressed and we have a lot going on. But if you're not taking care of you, then of course you're going to feel stressed. Of course things are going to pile up. Again, going back to the idea of control, the only thing you can control is what you're doing for yourself. We can only control the fact that we are taking care of us, washing our hands as much as we can, eating well, hydrating, exercising if we can, and keeping up with our mental health and being mindful of that. So just, again, it's all about intention and it's all about being mindful. So just managing your stress as best as you can if you're feeling particularly stressed due to workload right now. And also, again, recognizing that this is temporary and it won't always be this way. And I know that that's hard to see right now because of the lack of information and lack of knowledge in terms of how long this is going to last. But knowing that this is temporary and eventually, we're in a state of flux. Everything's changed. We're in a transition period, trying to figure out how to work through this or how to transfer things online. So there's a lot of change happening, and just being kind of compassionate with ourselves and saying, like, this is a stressful time. Of course, I'm going to feel more stressed and more anxious about this. Like, this is something that no one has ever experienced before. We're all kind of going through it together. So, it's going to be tricky, but just know that it's temporary, and eventually things will kind of become more neutral, and you'll be able to hopefully handle the stress of it as best as you can. And you're doing the absolute best you can right now, and just give yourself a little pat on the back that, you're working through this as best as you can. So someone, again, kind of reminding us of the fact that, this has been a huge wake-up call, right? And we're being asked to slow down and to actually focus in on the things that are genuinely important for day-to-day life, whether we're in a pandemic or not. So practicing mental health and kind of keeping up with that, practicing good self-care, hygiene, nutrition, like, these are all things that are important now more than ever because of the high stress and the uncertainty and everything. But again, reminder, like, these are basic things that are important for everyday life. And even when things are not in kind of a chaotic state, like, those are really important things to do for yourself just in general. So if you can practice those now during a stressful time, it'll be even easier to maintain less stress when things go back to normal. I agree. Someone posted that customers often take out their frustration on store clerks at checkouts, and that's absolutely true. Unfortunately, people who are working frontline are getting the brunt of people's anxieties and frustrations because, again, this is such a heightened state. And I think when, especially in something like this, people who are struggling with their heightened emotions and even being out in public, whether or not you feel a certain sense of anxiety. I think it is anxiety producing being out in public. So I think people are triggered by that just naturally because of the situation, and just worried about, you know, getting germs and contracting something and whatever. So I think that frustration isn't really necessarily directed at the person, but it's about the state of things that are going on and what's happening. I think the best thing we can do in those moments is to take a breath and just realize that it's not personal, which is hard to do, especially if someone's kind of directly kind of saying something rude to you. But again, when these things are coming up, it's not about you, it's about what's going on. It's about that person and what they're dealing with and the anxiety that they are having and the frustrations that they're feeling. And oftentimes, like I said, there's secondary emotions. So anger typically is one of them, that we express anger, we behave like we're angry or frustrated, but it's not actually about frustration. We're actually fearful or scared or feeling disappointed or feeling triggered, right? So if we can just kind of, again, check in and be like, you know what, that wasn't about me. I was doing the best that I can at my job. These people are just really stressed. They're really anxious, and that's coming out in frustration towards me. Just know that you're appreciated, and that your work is really important, and that we wouldn't be able to have food or other services that we need without you. So what you're doing is really important, and it says more about how those people are dealing and handling their emotions than it does about your work performance. Okay. So just two more questions. So one came in about visiting a parent and keeping a safe distance from their parent. I can't necessarily answer that one per se. I'm not an expert on the field, and I know that different people will have different opinions on this in terms of what really is social distancing and what isn't. And it's tricky because we want to see our loved ones, and we don't want to not see them. But the least amount of interaction you can have, the better. Making sure if you do go over and see them, like making sure you maybe you're not touching the same things, or that you don't come in contact with the same surfaces, or just making sure that a lot of people I've seen, which is actually quite beautiful and sad in the same ways, people going to visit loved ones at seniors homes or who are in seniors complex, and kind of staying outside and being at the windows and talking to them on the phone, right? So there are ways to social distance in a safe way, but just being mindful of that and checking up on the current facts and the latest information on what they're saying about social distancing is really important. But again, I don't want to answer one way or the other on that one, just because I'm not the expert on that, and I don't know exactly what the most up-to-date and current regulations or rules that they're talking about right now. But just kind of check in on that and kind of do some research, and just make sure you're being as safe as possible. Like I said, don't kind of come in contact with the same surfaces, and just do the best that you can to limit the contact. So another one on how to deal with anxiety-induced restlessness. So I think that's an interesting one. I can imagine that a lot of us are feeling a bit restless with kind of being stuck inside and not being able to do the same things that we used to do. So I feel as though something that's important to check in with yourself is things you can do to bring yourself back and calm yourself down, calm your nervous system down. So the reason you're feeling restless is likely because there's some sort of coping mechanism that you used to be able to do that maybe you're not able to do anymore. So how can we find a different coping strategy that's going to help you feel more calm and more grounded when you don't have that other one that you used to have? And again, anxiety has a lot of physiological effects. When we feel heightened, when we feel really anxious, that can, it affects your body too. So calming your body down in the best way that you can through deep breathing or meditation or yoga, or even going for a run, or being kind of exercising at home, anything to kind of like relieve some of that energy that's being created through the anxiety will be really important in terms of kind of calming yourself back down. And again, being really mindful and compassionate with yourself that, you know, this is really hard. It's not easy being stuck at home, not being able to do the same things that we used to do, and not being able to distract ourselves maybe in the same ways that we used to. So it's just important to be mindful of how you're coping with your anxiety. Are you coping with it, or are you just allowing it to kind of build up and build up? And if you have the capacity to find ways to decrease your anxiety as best as possible, and find ways to release some of that energy that you're having that might be causing that restlessness. Okay, so along the same lines of being a frontline worker, being a counselor, being a therapist, we're also being asked to support a lot of others through this really difficult time. So for those of us who are supporting others right now, first of all, you're doing a great job, and you're doing the best that you can. And again, all the same things apply, right? We have to be especially mindful of how we're coping right now. And this can apply to anyone who's caring for a loved one, who is a frontline worker, anyone who's being affected by stress, right? Like when we're being asked to support family members or loved ones, or even clients or patients, whatever the case may be, we're being asked to give a lot of ourselves, and that can be really tough, and it's challenging and it's draining, but it's also important. So again, taking care of yourself is the one thing I can say that is the most important thing, and making sure that you're staying on top of your own self-care, and managing yourself as best as you can is really important. And making sure you're carving out time if you have the space to do those things. So incorporating it into your daily routine is really important. And just making sure you're giving yourself time, whether it be 5 minutes at the end of the day, 5 minutes at the start of the day, like a little walk at lunchtime to get some fresh air, just anything you can do and you have the ability to do, take it, so that you're able to maintain yourself and not burn out during the time when we're kind of needed more than usual. So I think that's all the questions. I just want to thank everyone for coming out. It's awesome to get to speak with people and answer questions and just have this kind of conversation and dialogue. I hope it was helpful for people and they kind of learned something new. For those of you who are interested in the groups and webinars that CMHA is offering, please check those out, and you can email info@cmhanb.ca, and that's in the chat box there, so you can do that, or you can follow them on Facebook, and all of their events will be posted there. And otherwise, just thank you so much. And I really appreciate, being here and being able to do this. And if anyone has any questions that they didn't get answered or they want to follow up, I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. And you can send me an email after this, and I can answer some questions and kind of guide you through that as well. So thank you again. And I hope everyone's staying well and being as healthy as they can, and kind of managing as best we can, and just know that, you know, everyone's doing as much as they can right now, and that's all we can ask for. So thank you so much. And everyone be well and take care.